What is up, amigos? We have 10 days until early access for Diablo 4, and we are continuing the build pre-release prep series with a new class feature, the Druid. In this video, we are going to over one of my beta builds, the Earthbender Landslide Druid, fully revamped. And as always, if you guys are interested in more Diablo 4 content, hit that like button and subscribe. Also, thank you all so much. We actually just hit over 1K subs. I appreciate every one of you. So let's go ahead and jump into this. So the Landslide Earthbender build is something that I worked on in the beta and played most of in the beta. So with all that information and obviously being able to talent in for Endgame, this build I am confident will be one of the best builds in the entire game. Not only is this build incredibly tanky, but it has huge damage ceiling. There are so many different affixes that scale with our build, and I think this druid has some of the craziest aspects in the entire game as well. Another big bonus is in the beta test we were not able to test out the druid boon class specialty. So as you can imagine, given the information already, this build revolves around Landslide. Our source of vulnerable infliction is with Storm Strike, and might I add, Storm Strike is probably the best ability in the game to apply vulnerable status, as it has the highest chance to proc at 50%, and it chains up to 3 enemies. So before we dive into the abilities, let's just go over the pros and cons. So the first pro, like I said, this build is incredibly tanky. It has layers on layers on layers. It has a massive damage potential. The scaling is crazy with how many affixes and percent damage that we can scale with it. It's by far one of the safest hardcore builds because of the layers of defensives that we put into the build. We have CC for days. I mean, we can crowd control an enemy up to maybe 20 seconds if we really tried. One of the best things about this build is it does not require a single aspect to feel good. But let me tell you, they sure do take it over the top, and I know what you're thinking, so do a lot of other aspects for a lot of builds, but trust me when I say druids have crazy damage scaling aspects. So all in all, AoE and single target, huge pro. And might I add, it's a very, very simple build, especially when broken down. I will break it down in the video as best I can, and I always have a written guide to break it down more into detail. So for a few cons, the lack of mobility is here in this build. That's just druid in general. I feel the lack of mobility makes us feel like we need to take trample. Trample is decent, but it is on a 14-second cooldown. Now, because this is a caster druid, the landslide animation can feel clunky, and it may not be for everybody, especially if you are a more melee-oriented player. I'll be the first one to also say the keystone passive sucks. We'll get more into that in a bit here. And the build is heavily reliant on stacking crowd control and vulnerable for the big damage. And min-maxing, again, as my other builds, it is not for everyone. I understand that, but please trust me when I say I try to make it as easy as I can through the written guides for people to understand why we choose what we choose and what affixes to hunt for when we're min-maxing our gear. So let's jump into the spells. Storm Strike. Storm Strike, by default, we get a 25% damage reduction when we deal damage. Enhanced Storm Strike gives us a 15% chance to immobilize all enemies hit for 2.5 seconds. Remember though, Storm Strike can actually chain up to 3 enemies, so this is an AoE CC on our basic ability. The big modifier here is Fierce Storm Strike. Fierce Storm Strike has a 50% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. So Landslide obviously is our main ability. Landslide is a casted ability that spawns 2 pillars on the sides of your target, crushing them. Another fun fact actually is Landslide has the highest damage increase per point allocated at a whopping 7.4% per point. So any gear you have while using this build that has plus skills to spirit abilities or plus skills to landslide, use them. The damage spike will be noticeable. Enhanced Landslide allows us to immobilize enemies every 4 casts. The big thing here is Primal Landslide. So, Primal Landslide, every time we stun or immobilize an enemy, we gain a Terra Mo. Each time we cast Landslide, it consumes said Terra Mo. and it guarantees a crit with 40% crit damage. Now you may be worried about not being able to stun immobilize bosses. Well, fear not, we have a 10% inherent chance on hit, not with just Landslide, but any hit, to grant a terror emote when we hit that boss. Our defensive ability of choice is Earthen Bulwark. Our defensive, once we use, we will get a barrier that absorbs up to 63% of our base life for 3 seconds. Enhanced Bulwark makes us unstoppable for that 3 seconds, and Preserving Bulwark grants a 18% base life as Fortify buff every time we cast it. So Fortify reduces all damage taken by 10%, and it will be displayed over your health globe as a very bright red color. You can also hover over your health globe to see the total Fortify amount you have active at the time. Poison Creeper. Now, this is something that I think is super underrated, especially for Landslide and terror emotes. I think not enough people are aware of this, but I played around with it a lot in the beta, and it is insane. So the active effect of Poison Creeper entangles all surrounding enemies, immobilizing them for 2 seconds. That is the part that we care about. It is a terror emote farmer. And then Enhanced Poison Creeper just increases the immobilization duration by 1 second. So, Trample. Again, in the cons, I said that we lack mobility, so we feel forced to use Trample, but hear me out. Trample, as it is not a bad ability, especially when we go all the way through to natural Trample through Enhance. Enhance is just damage increase, doesn't really matter. We're not using Trample to damage. We are using Trample for natural Trample, which gives us another 20% base life as Fortify. Paired this up with Bulwark, and that's a pretty fast way to get 38% Fortify. Another reason we use Trample is we shapeshift into Werebear. Now with one of our passives here, Iron Fur, anytime that we enter Werebear form, we gain 6% damage reduction. This bonus persists for 3 seconds after leaving Werebear form, so it's just another nifty way to stack another defensive. Petrify is our ultimate of choice. We encase all enemies in stone, stunning them for 3 seconds, and yep, that grants us more terror modes. But we also deal 25% increased crit damage to enemies affected by Petrify, and if we hit a boss with Petrify, that crit damage doubles to 50%. And as you can imagine, one of the biggest things that's going to scale this build, since we are always going to be critting when we consume a terror emote, is crit damage. So I mentioned earlier that our Keystone passive sucks, and it really, really sucks. The only one worth looking at for this build is Earthen Might, which is a lucky hit chance at a measly 5% when damaging enemies with Earthen spells to restore full spirit and cause our attacks to be guaranteed crits for 5 seconds. Well, we're always going to be critting. So here's the problem with this also. Since we're always going to be critting, it's not really something to talk about, but we're also going to be getting an increased chance to restore all of our spirit because we're always critting. If you read this, it says this chance is increased by 10% when we crit, and another 10% if the target is stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. So technically we can get up to a 25% chance of this lucky hit to proc the restoration of all spirit. But then it's another algorithm where we 50-50 it. It's not a great Keystone passive, but we take it just to take it. So passives, the druids in general, and especially this build, is very, very passive heavy. So starting out with Heart of the Wild, this just increased our max spirit. Wild Impulses, it's a core skill increase, which is our Landslide, costs more spirit but deals more damage. Abundance, basic skills generate more spirit. 18% really is a lot of spirit. Predatory Instinct, this is not something that it's worth looking at because again, we're always critting. This is just a prereq for Iron Fur, which we just talked about. It's the damage reduction while in Werebear form. So under the Wrath section, these are the more important ones. We have Crushing Earth. Earth skills deal 15% increased damage to CC'd enemies. We are constantly CCing, we're stunning, we're slowing, we're immobilizing, sometimes we're even knocking back. We have Safeguard. Crit strikes with Earth skills, which again, we're always critting. I feel like I'm saying that a lot, but it's worth noting. We're always critting, which means we're always going to be stacking up Fortify, and we have a 38%, within 4 seconds by popping Bulwark and Trample. So Fortify is always going to be up. Which brings us to our next one, Stone Guard. While we have 50% of our max life as Fortify, we actually deal another 12% increased damage. So this is why it's important to stack Fortify to keep it up at all times. Defiance, nature magic skills deal 12% increased damage to elites. Natural disaster, your earth skills deal 12% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. We then have defensive posture, increases the amount of Fortify you gain from all sources by 15%. So I will have the math in the written guide, but this means 15% of our 20% for Trample and 15% of our 18% from our Bulwark, and then, you know, the math from the crit strikes, and all in all 15% more from all sources. This is great. Again, we just want to upkeep our Fortify buff at all times. Nature's Resolve, another chance to get Fortified, this time when we're struck. So we have a 15% when struck to fortify ourselves for 4.4% of our base life. So that's it for the build. Again, I think this will be one of the strongest builds in the game. I personally can't wait to test it out during live. I was a huge fan of Druid in the beta. Also, if you watched till the end here, I want to thank you all again and remind you that I do have a written guide in the description. But ultimately, thank you all for helping the channel reach over 1K subs. And until next time, amigos, take care.